From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts.
At daybreak when 200 people are standing around with gloves and chainsaws and they're ready to do something.
Yeah, you better make use of it.
Yeah, you better make use of it.
Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Local leaders carry big responsibilities, often without much recognition. They navigate complexity, stretch limited resources, and show up for their communities in moments of challenge and change. This podcast shares their real-world stories, lessons in leadership from people working to build trust, connection, and progress where it matters most. Now, longtime listeners may remember my conversation with Mayor Jonas Anderson of Cave City, Arkansas, which we published on August 20th, 2024. We had just met at the annual conference of the Arkansas Municipal League, where he was completing his term as board president. I had been invited to give the opening keynote. His interview was, quite simply, a lovely conversation about the qualities of small-town leadership, civic pride, and the dynamics that shape a close-knit community. And I especially recall his enthusiasm for Cave City's annual Watermelon Festival, home of what locals proudly call the world's sweetest watermelons. So it's not even a year later, and much has changed. On March 14th, 2025, so just over 4 months ago, Cave City was struck by a high-end EF3 tornado with winds reaching 165 miles per hour. It was the longest track tornado in Arkansas since 2008. It carved an 80-mile path of destruction through multiple communities. In Cave City, homes and businesses were leveled, essential services were knocked out, and according to numerous news reports, recovery began not in offices, but in parking lots, church kitchens, and the middle school gymnasium. Today, Mayor Anderson returns to reflect on the leadership lessons that emerged from those harrowing days and the ongoing work of recovery, resilience, and community rebuilding. Mayor Jonas Anderson, I am really glad to see you. Thank you for making time for this conversation, and welcome back to Community Catalysts.
Thanks so much, Matt. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, so let's just go right to it. The moment it hit, let's start right there. What do you remember most vividly about the day, even the moment that the tornado struck on March 14th? What were you doing? What was going on in Cave City that day?
Yeah, it was a Friday, and we had just relaunched our Chamber of Commerce, and so our chamber director and myself and some others actually had welcomed a group of elementary students to come to City Hall, and they had done some art projects and different things, and so they came, they had a tour of City Hall, they met with the chamber director, they went across the street to the library and had a little program there. It was really neat, and it was a beautiful day, and weather was nice, and so, yeah, we just had a great time, and of course, little did we know that not very many hours later, everything would be totally different, so that night, we knew the weather had a chance for severe weather for sure. I mean, they had been talking about it, and everybody was kind of, watching that. And so it did. It struck about 39 p.m. that night. As for me personally, I was, home with my wife and my 3 boys and our golden retriever. We were in the living room watching the weather. And Cave City had never been hit by a tornado like that. Not just in my lifetime, but in the entire history of the city back to, 1907 and beyond. So even as we were watching the weather forecast, they were like, Cave City looks like you may take a direct hit. And even then we were still kind of like, there's this little slice of doubt, like, I don't know, should we go to the shelter? Or maybe, maybe it had always diverted, it seemed like in years past. And so right about the time I was kind of processing that, our fire chief called. And, they were out and had visuals and things. And he said, we're about to take a direct hit. Everybody needs to get, in the shelter. We set the sirens off. And so my neighbor, an elderly gentleman that lives by himself, he has a storm shelter in his backyard. And so for years that we've lived next door to him, I've always said, hey, if we need to get in a shelter, I'll come over. We'll open it up. I'll help you get, from your house out the backyard, off the porch. And so That's what we did. I literally threw my 3-year-old over my shoulder, and my wife and other 2 boys and the dog. We all trotted out across the yard, ran over to the neighbor's house. I helped him get in the shelter. We shut the door, and about 5 minutes after that, it came tearing through.
I was going to ask you how long between like you got that call and the siren and you had to be in the shelter.
I'd say probably 10 minutes.
So let me make sure. You're saying that like you were watching TV, you were kind of in denial is probably not the right word, but you were thinking we were going to get lucky. This is going to miss us like it always does. And within 10 minutes, you were in a shelter and the tornado was upon you.
Yeah, pretty much. Unfortunately, there's a small community just adjacent to us to the southwest called Cushman, Arkansas. And so as we're watching the weather, they said, it looks like we're getting reports that Cushman just took a direct hit. They ultimately ended up losing 3 lives there in that community, unfortunately. So when I heard that on the weather, that it had taken a direct hit and it was basically cutting a straight path for Cave City. Yeah, like you said, I don't know if it's disbelief is the right word, but it was still kind of just like, is it really going to hit this time? And of course, then when the fire chief calls and says, absolutely, we're setting off the sirens, then we knew it was time to go. So
walk me through the next, is it hour or two? How long do you stay in the shelter? And when you come out, obviously, I imagine you're taking care of your family, you're looking at your own house. How quickly after that do your mayor responsibilities, duties kick in?
Yeah, honestly, they never shut off. I was in the shelter and I had taken a radio home with me that night. I have one that we keep just for me in case I want to take it home or if I'm out and need it or something. So the entire time I actually had that radio with me. So I was in the shelter and I could hear them talking and things, about what was going on. We were in the shelter, like I said, it was about 10 minutes and then probably another 10 or 15 minutes after that. It was not really long because, as you know, I think that tornado was doing about 55 or 60 miles per hour. So, as the crow flies, as they say, it didn't take very long to get from that previous community to Cave City. And it was on us pretty quick. All the power was out, of course. It had folded up the cellular phone tower like a pretzel all the way to the ground. And so when I opened, the big thing I knew was we could hear the siren. So there's a little vent pipe, in the top of the shelter. And I kind of had my ear turned up toward that. I wouldn't say we heard the classic freight train sound. It actually passed probably, 4 or 5 blocks away from our house. But what I did notice was the sound of the sirens. We could hear the tornado sirens wailing. And then all of a sudden, the sound really changed. It was almost literally like somebody had a vacuum cleaner, like you could just tell the waves of the sound of the sirens were changing. And I kind of glanced over at my wife and just one of those looks like, this doesn't sound, I don't think good things are happening. So after it was over, of course we, it's almost like a light switch. Like it was here, like it wasn't here, then it was here and then it's just gone. It was over. And so I opened up the storm shelter. Of course, like I said, it was pitch black, but I could tell my neighbor's house was intact. And so I could see his roof line. And then in the dark, through the dark and stuff, I could kind of make out my roof line. I think I even mentioned to my wife, I said, wow, actually, everything seems to be in place. So I wasn't really sure how much damage we got. But so we got out of the shelter, got my neighbor back in his house, and I said, well, I'll keep in touch with you because we obviously aren't going to have power maybe for a while, and got my family back in the house. So I would say after it passed, probably within 20 minutes, I was headed up to town because by then it was starting to trickle in, over the radio and things like that we really had a serious problem on our hands. And so I was going to go to the fire department, but I couldn't actually make it to the fire department. A lot of us couldn't make it there. So I ended up right at the main intersection, which is just about where the tornado crossed. And, from there, it was like a lot of the movies you see, just disbelief.
When you say you couldn't make it because there was so much debris in the roads?
Right. Yeah. So there was, obviously trees, but then there were, power lines and pieces of transformers and pieces of utility poles, and unfortunately, lots of pieces of, people's homes and businesses that were just scattered all over town, across the roadways and stuff. And so, yeah, I parked at the grocery store, which is right in town, and got out, and probably not the best idea, but basically started walking, stepping over stuff, half in the dark. I mean, you could hear natural gas, coming out of, service lines, obviously, where people's houses once were and were no longer there. Obviously, we had like a lot of water leaks from where, houses and stuff were torn away and the water service was still on, of course, and it was coming out of the ground. So it was kind of, a mini movie scene like you see, in Hollywood. It's just kind of unbelievable when you're standing there.
Mayor, could you remind everyone, what is the geographic size of Cave City and what's the population?
Yeah, so the population is just barely under 2,000. And as far as geographic goes, I mean, it's not a big place at all. It's like maybe a couple miles from one end to the other or something like that. I mean, it's not big, And so the tornado literally came pretty well right through the middle of it as it moved from, southwest to northeast.
So let's talk about you're making your way towards the fire station. You're walking in the dark through the debris. What are you thinking? What are you understanding are your immediate responsibilities as mayor in that moment?
I'll just start off and say, like, there was no electricity, the natural gas, the smell was really overpowering. I mean, there was a few times like it was really actually hard to walk down the street because it was just so powerful of a smell there. I guess whenever I was first there, I just thought, well, I've got to get myself to the fire department. And I will say we ended up getting all that cleared very quickly because people just honestly turned up out of nowhere with tractors and random equipment that they own on their farms. And they were clearing stuff. I mean, it felt like immediately. So,
You mean in the middle of the night?
oh, absolutely. Yes. I'd say, yeah, within 30 minutes of the storm, you could hear some chainsaws and there were tractors in the middle of the road pushing stuff out of the way so we could get to the fire department. Yeah. Yeah, just citizens. I mean, just random citizens. But I remember very vividly, like when we got to the fire station, and honestly, our two fire department buildings were also hit. So we had to do all this out of damaged buildings. We set up, like we knew right there, this is going to have to be the command center. This is where we're going to do this. And I said, there are two things that we have got to do. We have got to coordinate, obviously, like we got to coordinate all of this. And then we have got to communicate. And like, that was one of the most frustrating things because the cell phone tower had been destroyed. And, so all this stuff, like I need to do this, or I need to contact this. Like I just couldn't do it, not reliably. But that was my main thought was we've got to coordinate. We got to communicate. We got to get some structure set up here as quickly as possible. Cause as you know, like that's how this stuff spirals out of control. It doesn't take very long to be in a situation like that. If there's not somebody in charge, then, even innocently, other people becoming, it just becomes kind of a chaotic mess. So I'm pretty proud of the way that we pretty quickly got control of everything and laid it out and said, this is how we're going to coordinate this and this is how it's going to go.
I imagine that first responders, fire, police, other emergency workers, they have training, they have protocols, they learn how to deal with disasters when they happen.
Yeah.
What kind of training does someone get as a mayor to deal with a disaster in that moment? What had you been prepared with ahead of time that helped you in that moment? And I guess conversely, I'm going to ask, and what did you have to figure out on the spot?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously the EMS and police, fire, and all those people have the training that you really need. Honestly, as mayor, I mean, we do, like you've been with the Arkansas Municipal, for instance, like we do workshops and things, and part of that is disaster preparedness. But, speaking very candidly, I mean, anybody knows that you can set in a disaster preparedness workshop and then you can actually walk into a real disaster and you'll find out pretty quickly that, I mean, it's good to have a baseline, but a lot of this happens so fast and is so unpredictable that you do have to figure stuff out on the spot.
So you're saying Mike Tyson was right when he said that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face?
Yes, that is actually a really good, I'd forgot about that, but that is a good quote. Yeah, like, literally in the fire department, we had like this, disaster preparedness manual, for instance, and we did have it out and we were obviously looking through and like, okay, refresh ourselves. But also at the end of the day, I've told people like, I feel like either literally or just, in some other not as literal sense, you take that, you look at your binder, and then you like close it and push it aside and said, okay, now we gotta deal with this disaster, So yeah, mayors definitely, like I said, you can go through some workshops and things, but it's nothing like the real world when you do get punched in the face.
Is there anything in particular, though, from those workshops or from that advanced training that you had learned that actually kicked in and you found particularly useful in that moment?
Yeah. One thing that, especially with the disaster preparedness stuff that they talk about, and honestly, even just as mayor, I mean, I've always tried to be this way. That came most useful to me was the relationships and the lines of communication. For instance, like I'm very closely aligned with our state representative, from Little Rock. I know people, in the governor's office, that I can call on. I know people from, Department of Emergency Management that I can call on. A lot of law enforcement agencies and fire departments and things. It's not just where I scroll down a list and say, okay, it's apparently this person and this is their phone number. Like, no, I know these people. Like I have a good relationship with these people even outside of a disaster. And I really do think that played a huge role in that, because when I was at the fire department, those first, 30 minutes to an hour, when we were thinking, okay, we got to contact this. What are we going to do about this? I mean, I had a list of people in my head, like, we're going to have to, for instance, we need to set up a volunteer like command center too, not just operational. Like, who's going to coordinate all these volunteers? I knew right away, like, I have 2 or 3 friends / colleagues that if they're willing to come and volunteer, they will be perfect for this role. And so I literally was like texting them at 2 a.m. saying, hey, if you're okay and you are settled, which they didn't live right in town. So I knew that their property was fine. I said, literally, I need help. I need, like, if you can come coordinate this part of our response, that would be great. And they showed up there and they never left our side for 2 or 3 weeks. And they were, as I had predicted, they were perfect for that role. So I think that is the thing, is like, don't wait till the disaster hits. And then all of a sudden everybody's scrambling saying, well, I don't know. I don't know. Who do you call to do this? I don't know. We had a really good handle, I feel like, on exactly who to call, what to do. And it made a huge difference for us.
That's what you mean by coordination and communication. It was not just knowing what needs to get done, but knowing who you can call, who is going to pick up the phone at 3:00 in the morning and who's going to be there at 3:30 in the morning, and because you have that connection.
Yeah. And also realizing that, like, obviously the mayor, fire chief, and police chief, just for example, we can't coordinate all that. You know what I mean? Like, we're just like 3 people sitting around. We can't do that. So yeah, you've got to call and you've got to bring other people in and delegate some of this out and say, okay, I'm going to be handling this. Can you please handle this while I'm over here? That way, this is handled and taken care of. So yeah, it made all the difference for us.
Let me flip the question around now that you have 4.5 months of hindsight behind you on this. If you had to go through this experience again, but there was something you could have planned better or prepared for better in advance, what is something that you would point to now?
Overall, I'm so impressed and grateful for the way that our people did respond to this and did coordinate this, that I really am being as humbly honest as I can when I say there's not a whole lot there that I think, wow, we did kind of actually, we really screwed this part of it up. The big thing that I will say on that is, as far as like the volunteer effort, that can get out of control really quickly. When you have a disaster, obviously people, very well-meaning people, people will start pouring into your community to help. And I'll tell you from our experience, you had better be ready to coordinate that, because what you end up with then is you have literally hundreds of people showing up that are expecting to be led and told, this is what you need to do, and you need to go here and do this, and this is the need here. And if you're not careful, you end up with a big crowd of people and there's not really a lot of direction for them. So they show up and they have tools and resources, and then they kind of just, end up being a little bit lost on where to go and what to do. And almost that can kind of hinder you more than it can help. And the other part of that, of course, is like the relief supplies. I think that, again, I really am proud of the way we did that, but it's because we kind of got a little heads up from some mayors that had experienced this before that said, hey, watch your supply effort, because I know other communities you end up with, you're so overwhelmed with supplies. I talked to one mayor 2 years after their tornado, they still had a warehouse full of supplies that they didn't know what to do with that were going to waste. And an article that I read, it called that the second disaster, was where you just get so overwhelmed with, very well-meaning things that in the end, you don't have a good coordination effort to actually disperse it and get it out to people.
I want to go to the first part of what you were just talking about. In the disaster movies, an earthquake and whatever, the first responders, the military, whoever, the heroic people go in and they save the people who were there.
Yep.
What you're saying is, well, the second phase of this, as you experienced it, was this tremendous amount of goodwill and volunteer effort that shows up. I don't think I've ever seen that in the disaster movies. So let's just talk about that for a moment. It sounds like you were able to find the right people to marshal the volunteers and to get that organized. But tell me more about what it was like in the moment. So you already said people are showing up with tractors and chainsaws. They're already clearing the streets. They're doing this on their own. What did you learn about this goodwill that emerges right after a disaster?
Yeah, in our experience, like I said, within 30 minutes, there are already people showing up, right? And so with our effort, we knew that we kind of had to marshal all that together and kind of funnel that into a more useful and efficient means, right? I mean, if you have 200 people that are kind of just scattered, running around, kind of doing this and that and the other, that is great and it is very helpful. But we learned pretty quickly that we absolutely do need to have some structure to this. We've got to have, as you said, at daybreak when 200 people are standing around with gloves and chainsaws and they're ready to do something.
You better make use of it.
Yeah, you better make use of it. Yes, absolutely. And because we did have a few instances where people we came from, X amount of miles away to help. And now we're here though, and we don't know what to do. And we did have a little bit of that, but I'm like I said, I'm very proud of the way that we quickly course corrected on that kind of a thing. And that's the big thing is, you better have a plan and you better be able to make very good use of those resources, because also, a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks after that, those resources are going to start drying up because, whether they want to or not, I mean, obviously people have to get back to their lives. They have to go back to work, or they have to go back to taking care of their kids or whatever, especially if they've driven from 20, 50, 100 miles away to help you.
I mentioned in the intro, because I picked this up in some of the news reports that I was reading, the need to convert the middle school gym into a donation and volunteer hub. Can you tell us a little bit about, what does it take behind the scenes to get those kinds of physical places organized and functioning?
Yeah, that was one of the things we did pretty early on. Part of that, again, it goes back to relationships. I mean, I've known the superintendent of our school district, the principals. My mother taught at our school district for 40 years. I was, educated there, graduated there. So we have very close personal relationships with those people. And so, very early on, our school was super generous because we knew that we were going to be thankfully inundated with supplies. And so really it just took a phone call to the school administration and said, hey, we're trying to figure out what we need to do here. And our problem is school was going to be starting back after spring break pretty quick, so we also had to juggle the idea of if we convert this gym into this big relief center, how long can the school, afford to let us fill up and use their gym, which they were gracious and said, well, don't worry about it. Do what you got to do. So really for us, that's all it took was a phone call. Now that sounds simplistic. Obviously there was a lot of stuff in the background about logistics and okay, now that you've opened a relief center, now you got to find people to staff the relief center, right? So that was another thing we had. But again, we were able to just, quickly call, text, get with the right people who said, hey, I'm not going to be out running a chainsaw, but I would love to post up at the gym and I will coordinate supplies and organize them into, canned food and clothing and this and that, and kind of have, again, a very efficient system of how we're going to give this out to people and all that. And so it worked out really, really well.
So far we've been talking about things that happened really quickly, like that night or first thing the next morning. Let's expand the time frame out. And I'm not sure if I should be asking about a week or 2 weeks or whatever, but at what point do you start receiving support from the state or from FEMA or the federal government? Like what's involved in in getting more resources to your community that you have, within your confines already.
Yeah, man, as far as the state response, I couldn't be happier with that actually. We had about 40 state troopers on the ground, probably within a couple of hours of the tornado. We had the National Guard here pretty quickly. The governor got in touch with me personally pretty quickly. And I think she was here maybe within a few days or something like that. She had let me know, hey, I'm not going to show up right away and get in the way or anything. I mean, that's how it always is. They don't want to. You don't want to show up with a presidential detail or governor detail and get in the way of those first little bit of response. But they were here as quickly as they felt was appropriate. And so, yeah, into the first week or two, we were really starting to ramp up as far as like National Guard. They were there within those first 3 days, and they stuck with us for quite a while, helping like patrolling at night and backing up our police department and stuff like that. Especially, we went about 3 days without electricity in the entire city, so that was a little bit of a challenge. But on that in front, Entergy Arkansas, which is our electric provider here, they did some heroic work here. Like I said, we had about a little over 200 poles that had to be reset, and they did that within 3 days or less and had us back.
Wow.
It was incredible. Incredible. We had a big community meeting not too long after the tornado, and I vividly remember it made a big impact on the Entergy folks that were there. But the topic of Entergy came up, and we basically said, hey, we want to thank Entergy for all the work they did to get us back with electricity, and they had a standing ovation like they had never received before. And so it was really something to see that. So yeah, like you said, that timeline of days into maybe 1 to 2 weeks out, we were really getting a lot of support, but it came quickly. It really did. I think we had like 14 different law enforcement agencies that surrounded us that responded pretty quickly. A number of other fire departments and stuff were sending, men and women and trucks and equipment in. So it was a really good response.
Neighboring towns were sending in their people, because if they hadn't been directly impacted by a tornado, they had some capacity, they could send people to you. How much of that required you getting on the phone and calling those mayors or whoever and asking them for support, versus were they just kind of taking initiative on their own and just, people were showing up for you?
It was a mix. And honestly, I'd say the majority of it was the latter. They just showed up. And honestly, like I said, it was hard to get in touch with us. I mean, a little bit. It was pretty hard to get in touch with us. For instance, we had one mayor actually who showed up here with his street department. His city is about an hour or more away from us. And I didn't even know he was here until someone said, did you know the mayor of so-and-so? Did you know mayor so-and-so is here? And I said, really? And they said, yeah, they're over like on so-and-so street, just like they had showed up and just basically like commandeered a block of our city, and they were just clearing debris. And, the mayor was giving his guys, directions on let's do this and let's do this. I mean, obviously they came and met up with us later, but like it didn't take like an hour of trying to, find me and ask this. And they just showed up and started helping, which was great. He
became the mayor of the block of Cave City.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, exactly. It was incredible. Stuff like that was really incredible to see. We had several cities like that. Our neighbors immediate to the south, the city of Batesville, Mayor Rick Ellenbaugh there, who again, I have a very good relationship with through the Arkansas Municipal League and just in general. Somebody told me, and I think this is correct, that the city of Batesville had positioned like grapple trucks and some of their equipment at our southern city limits so quickly that the state police had not even reopened the highway yet to let vehicles through. But the city of Batesville was already stationed up waiting to come in and help. That's how quick they came.
Mayor, does that support show up because there are mutual assistance agreements or things that have been written up and planned in advance? Or is this in the moment, there are civic leaders who are saying, we have the capacity and we can provide the help and we're just going to go and do it?
That's exactly what it is. I don't know of a single mutual aid, quote unquote agreement on paper with any of those cities or anything like that. No. I mean, it's just like you said, it's civic leaders, it's, fellow firefighters, it's fellow police officers, it's fellow EMTs and neighboring communities that are saying, hey, we didn't get hit, but they just got slammed. Let's load up and go. And that's what they do.
Hi, it's Matt with a quick note before we continue. Most episodes of Community Catalysts run about a half an hour, but every now and then a story deserves more space, and this is one of those moments. It's a rare privilege to go this deep, not just into a significant event, but into the lived experience of someone who had to lead through it, minute by minute, decision by decision. So our conversation with Mayor Jonas Anderson continues. Ahead, you'll hear how state and federal support came together, or didn't, what the mayor learned about emotional wellness through disaster, and how a broken sign became a symbol of resilience. Stay with us. So, Mayor, you mentioned the governor, you mentioned the state, you mentioned the other cities. What about FEMA? What about the federal government? What's their role in disaster response here?
I'm kind of a little fuzzy on the timeline, honestly. FEMA was on the ground here within a week, I would say, maybe less than that. They came and did their initial assessment. And so as FEMA does, they come in and we had kind of some of our team members that got with them, partnered up with them, and took them around to the affected places. These are the houses, these are the streets, and they went block by block, address by address, and they were making notes and doing all this stuff. And then they actually left, went back to wherever they were headquartered at, and did their assessment. So we kind of had to just wait on that. Once they came, did the assessment, and then went back, and then they said, we'll get back to you as far as like the disaster declaration and all that. Now, full disclosure, I mean, when they were here and when you were standing in town, you were looking around, you were thinking, well, this is a no-brainer. It's definitely going to meet the threshold or whatever, metric it is.
The devastation was that obvious.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, when you looked around, especially for such a small place, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, surely this will qualify or whatever. Yeah.
Was there loss of life in Cave City as well?
No, thankfully there was not. And like I said, unfortunately, in the community of Cushman that it hit right before us, there were 3 or 4 ladies that lost their life kind of in the same neighborhood. I say neighborhood, it was in kind of a rural area right outside the city limits. Interestingly, I believe, I hate to fully say this, I believe though, someone told me that we were the only municipality that was directly hit along that tornado path, that the rest of it was more like, in rural, what you would say rural communities, but as far as like a city limits taking a direct hit, we may have been one, if not the only one.
So FEMA came out within the week. They're doing the checklist. You're thinking for sure, we've got a disaster here, and that's what they're there for. What's the rest of that story?
Yeah, honestly, the rest of that story is, positive and negative both, unfortunately. So it took about, I don't remember how long it took to get the first answer, but the first answer, and I asked this of the governor and some other people of emergency management folks. I said, so just so I understand the process, the governor makes the request, and then FEMA does their assessments, and then they advise the president, this is the situation. Here are the facts as we see them, and this is what we recommend. And I said, but then the president can still decide, one way or the other. And they said, yes, that's the process we're waiting on. Unfortunately, after that first assessment was done, the answer came back from the White House with a denial that it didn't rise to the threshold or whatever, the metric that it was, dollar amount or whatever. And so meaning that they feel like that the municipalities and the counties affected should be able to probably handle it on their own, maybe with some state assistance. And so, yeah, that was honestly a shock. I think it was a shock to a lot of people here. So the governor, like, as soon as we got that word, the governor was in contact with me and was like, look, we're going to appeal this. We're trying to package some other stuff in, and we're going to resubmit it. But they had a pretty short window for an appeal. But we're going to work really hard and try to appeal this. And I was like, okay, that's great. Because we were looking for the individual assistance for families. We're also looking for the public assistance to help out the cities and the counties. From March to May, we were waiting on that. We were kind of in this limbo, okay, we got denied. Now it's been appealed. Now we're going to wait and see what the appeal comes back as. And so finally, I think it was into May, which is now, about 2 months later, the appeal came back and they approved the individual assistance, but they held firm on the denial for public assistance. So they felt that the cost and everything was something that the city and the counties should be able to handle.
I'm not sure that I understand this fully. I thought that the FEMA response, again, I only know this from TV shows and movies, that the FEMA response is like an army of first responders who, supplement the work of your local first responders who are there with emergency services and engineers and whatever else is needed. It sounds like this was really more about who's going to pay for the restoration and the recovery from this. Was there something in the actual disaster recovery, like in the on-site thing that you needed, even beyond money, that you were expecting or hoping that FEMA was going to provide?
Honestly, and I didn't know I'm like you, I really didn't know what to expect when they said, hey, FEMA's, en route. But yeah, in our experience, when FEMA arrived, it was more about the assessment team that's on the ground. Hey, let's, like I said, let's go address to address. Let's look at the damage, see what the level is, and then let's do our assessment versus what you said, where you think it's kind of like a federal army of people to supplement your own first responders. That's not what we had. And, if that's not the process, that's fine. But yeah, most of the actual on the ground resources that we had came more from the state level. We had the Department of Emergency Management was here. The Red Cross was here and set up some sheltering and supplies and things like that. We also had a lot of faith-based organizations, some especially few big ones that showed up. And they had their own volunteers, and they kind of were like their own self-contained unit, their disaster response unit that would show up, set up in their mobile command center, and they had volunteers that would coordinate with us. And they also were like serving food and things like that to members of the community. So a lot of that response did come from state, and then also just, nonprofit and individual partners.
So does that mean that the FEMA response essentially is a financial backstop for recovery?
Yeah, I mean, in our experience, that's more what that was is, FEMA comes and looks at everything and decides, okay, what kind of, financial assistance can we offer to individuals and families to help them and then get back on their feet? And then what kind of assistance can we offer to the cities and counties to help them with some of the infrastructure costs and things that they're going to incur?
Mayor, let's talk a little bit about the emotional weight of having been through this. I'm curious, first off, how are you holding up? And I'm also curious about your city council and how, the people who are leading police and fire and other parts of this recovery, what's been the effect of them? Here we are 4.5 months later.
Yeah, and thanks for asking. I'm fine. Early on, people were saying that too. Like they'd come up to me or to, and I hate to even when you go into a conversation like this. By the way, I don't want to compare myself to an emergency responder type at all. People are like, "Oh, you poor thing, you may," or "Oh, I bet it's been rough." No, it's been rough for the police and the fire and the people like that. I mean, it has been rough. Now, has it been tiring for me at times? Absolutely, but not even comparison to any of those other people. So I do want to get that. I always want to say that out right at the beginning.
That's fair.
But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt like those people that I were texting at 2 a.m., saying, hey, can you guys come help me out with this? We honestly probably spent, the next 36 hours not going to bed. But that's the way that the first responders, lots of them obviously were doing that and more. So, but we were checking in with each other, and I'm really proud of that. Actually, there were lots of times where it would be easy to get lost and not do that. But I feel like we also did a pretty good job of like taking each other aside and being like, hey, we got to coordinate this. Okay, that sounds good, but just like hold up for a minute. Are you okay? I remember people doing that to me, like literally almost taking your face in their, in their hands and saying, hey, wait, stop talking. Are you okay though? Are you good? And I do remember that, like we did that quite a bit. One, of course with me too, and a lot of us have young kids and stuff. And so not only were we, trying to take care of the city and do what we are obligated to do, what we either swore an oath to do or signed up to do or whatever you want to call it. But we also have, wives and husbands and kids back home. And, whether your house was damaged or not, you also have to make sure and take care of yourself and your family. And, I feel like everybody was able to manage that pretty well. I managed it pretty well. Frankly, sometimes I probably could have managed it better because, it does. I mean, it sucks you in to where you wake up and you realize, wow, I haven't been at my house in, 12 hours, or like I haven't even checked in with my wife in 8 hours or something, especially since the cell phones were down.
When you say you could have managed it better, what lesson did you learn about how you could take care of yourself better that might be instructive for someone who may experience this in their community sometime in the future?
Yeah, well, it's literally just your time. I mean, like I said, with us, it was even more difficult because we had no cell phones. So, for instance, and we had 3 days of no electricity. So, like personally, in my situation, I had a wife and 3 kids at my house who had no electricity, no good cell phone reception, or anything like that, to where she could just check in with me. So, like in my head, I constantly had to be thinking like, I need to check in, or I need to get on this side by side and run back to my house and check in or whatever. And very candidly, I mean, it's easy to not do that because you're so sucked in. I mean, for me, like, I might start in at like, I think we had like a briefing every morning at like 5:30 a.m. We tried to do it about the time the sun was coming up, just kind of as a general, like, okay, where are we? What are we doing today? So I would be at the fire department by 5 or 5:30. Well, then, I just get sucked in. And before I know it, it's like, oh my gosh, it's 2 p.m. Really? Like, I've got to go home and like make sure, everything's fine.
I'm going to put you on the spot for just a second. Tell me what surprised you the most about the response and the recovery efforts.
One thing that I was really surprised at, I mean, I don't know, you always say you're surprised, but then not, because you know your place and you know your people. But like the patience and the understanding that people had, it's very like, that's a very stressful, obviously emotional situation, the disaster, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to be done. And quite frankly, there's usually a lot of people that, truthful or not, they feel like they know how it needs to be done. And so sometimes, you have to step in as the mayor or as the emergency management person or as the chief of police and say, hey, I appreciate it, but like, we're in charge of this and this is actually how we're going to do this. And so there's a lot of emotion built into that, right? And so I feel like that kind of stuff can kind of get out of hand, when people are running on, 3 days of no sleep and it's hot and, they haven't had any electricity and they probably haven't had a good clean shower and a hot meal in days. The temper and the patience can get a little thin. I was really surprised at how little of that we saw.
Mayor, I have one last question I want to ask you, one last topic I want to go through, which is your use of social media in this moment. And I went back. I've been following you for quite some time on I think both on Facebook and I think on LinkedIn, and I see that you're using the hashtag Cave City Comeback. I told you before we hit the record button that I was particularly moved by the photo you just posted of the Welcome to Cave City sign, which is all kind of crumbled up. And I want you to talk about two things. I want to talk about what have you learned about how to use social media in this kind of moment, especially in the recovery and rebuilding that's coming here. And is there kind of something heartening out of this? I think that there is, and what lessons you would suggest others be thinking about how they use social media, whether they're in crisis or not. But talk about Cave City Comeback.
Yeah, I don't even remember where that came from. It was not me. I will say that. I did not come up with that, but somebody, blurted that out or used it or something like that. And I thought, man, I am really going to latch onto that because that's exactly what we're doing, right? We've got this recovery and this comeback, but it's like, it's in our own style. It's very uniquely Cave City, I feel like. And so, yeah, Cave City Comeback, that's been a really good one to latch onto. Social media, I've definitely evolved on it since the tornado, but honestly, when I first got on the city council in 2010, our city, we didn't have a website. I don't believe anybody on the city council or any city government, I know officially, was not using, social media or anything like that. So really the only way to know what was going on with the city is if you went to the city council meeting. And honestly, in a lot of small towns, you don't have a lot of people go to the city council meeting. Not even so much because they don't care, but they have their own lives. They're just everybody's just busy, and you kind of hopefully trust your local government enough to know, like, you don't feel like I have to be at every council meeting to see what they're doing and watch what they're doing. So when I got on there, honestly, one of the first things I did was social media. I worked with the city and got us a website pretty quickly. I established like an official, city social media presence, and then I have my own that I started, and I just started telling that story. I mean, every city council meeting, what was going on, what we were talking about in meetings, and I pretty quickly found that really struck a nerve with people, even in a small community where you think everybody knows what's going on. Really, people had no idea what was going on. And so I would get people to come up to me, like in a grocery store or at church or something, whether I knew them or not. And they would be like, I'm reading everything you're posting on Facebook about the city, and I really appreciate that. And so I've kind of just ran with that. And then as mayor, obviously, it's a whole nother level that I was working on. As far as the tornado goes, though, it's an entirely another story, right? I mean, it's one thing to post, some random things now and then throughout the month about, hey, this is something really good we're doing, or hey, we applied for this grant, or hey, look how good the pool looks this year thanks to our crew. But in the tornado situation, people were using that to get literally life-saving information because cell phone service was very, very sparse. And so right off the bat, I was trying, and this is not something, disaster. I'd never been in a disaster at all. I'd never responded, unless you consider COVID, which was not the same. That was more of a slow creep, right? Yeah, very, very different. So very quickly, I realized as part of our coordinate and communicate strategy, social media was it. I mean, because we could get Wi-Fi. We actually had some Starlink stuff that was brought in to help us get, connected. And it was critical. And I've since had, during the actual crisis, and even literally about an hour before you and I got on this podcast, I was at the park, because you do know we're in the midst of our watermelon festival right now, actually, which we can talk about. But I actually had someone come to me and they introduced themselves to me, and they were like, man, I just want to say that the communication that you have put out during this entire tornado crisis, he said, has set an incredibly high bar, something like that. And I mean, I'm obviously like very humbled by that. It's not anything, like, oh, look at me, I'm so awesome. But it is gratifying to know that, because I have put a lot of effort into it, and I have tried to be very intentional about it. And it seems to have really worked well for people to get them the information that they needed.
I'm going to come back to the social media in just a second, but I'll just acknowledge we're recording this on Friday, July 25th, and I checked your website. So the Watermelon Festival was yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right? Or this weekend.
Yes.
It's going on literally as we speak. And so I wasn't going to escape without asking you, did the watermelon survive, the tornado okay?
Yes, actually, they were just starting to get that stuff in the ground. And this may not be factual. I don't believe any of the actual growers, like their fields, were hit or anything like that. But
that's a relief.
Yeah, the biggest problem we had, and this is every year, is the crop was a little bit late, but that was honestly just due to rainfall. If you get too much or too little, it can really throw a wrench in things. But yeah.
I want to go back to social media for just a second, because I've been watching your feed and I see it. And here's my observation. Since the tornado, you've done a particularly wonderful job of demonstrating progress for the city in the recovery. So one of the most recent posts I saw was that there was going to be a scheduled burn of vegetation. And on its own, right, in any other time that there was a vegetation burn off wouldn't be really newsworthy. But in this moment, that's a sign of progress. That says we are moving forward. We are taking care of things. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and people get to see that's going on. And in municipal work, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that, yeah, we can show the actions that are taking place, but people don't always see the progress that's being made. It seems to me in your social media feed, what you've done since here is to continually show progress, which is a way of being accountable to the people in your community and letting them know and have confidence that there actually is important work underway. Does that make sense? Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head there. I mean, with that burn, we actually talked about had some very focused like conversations about this massive pile of vegetation debris that we were going to burn off. Like, you think like, okay, we piled it up, let's light a match, we're done. But like, we actually talked about it very intentionally. Like, for instance, our chamber director, our festival director, a couple members on the city hall team that were responsible for kind of making sure that that got piled up and disposed of properly. We talked about that, like, y'all, this is more than just a burn pile. Like, this is really symbolic. And it's honestly kind of cathartic to watch it burn in a sense. And I had people in town tell me that, like, it's a cathartic thing. Like, we had this awful devastation that literally changed the landscape of Cave City. And we have now piled it into this field. And, it was like 15 or 20 foot tall and, huge. I mean, we're talking stumps that came out of the ground that we had to have big cranes lift and slowly. I mean, you can't move these things. It's like the size of a house, 100 and 200-year-old oak trees that were down that had to be dealt with. And so, yeah, it was much more than just set this big pile of brush on fire. It was more of, this is a marker for us. This is, like you said, this is progress. We finally come to the time where we're not really picking up vegetation debris anymore. We've done a really good job. We've gotten all this stuff out of people's way so they can start rebuilding their lives. And now, for lack of a better phrase, we're going to burn the sucker down and cheer it on as it burns,
It's your own version of Burning Man.
It is. It absolutely was. And I'll say, as it was burning, like, we had people driving up by there looking at it. I mean, you had to keep your distance because it was hot. But yeah, there was people that were interested, like, wow, I want to see this thing burn.
Last thing, tell me about the sign. I told you I saw the picture on social media. It's crumpled. It's the welcome to Cave City. But you had a really interesting message about that sign on social media. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was another pretty deep conversation. Like, it's surprising how deeply you can talk about a sign, right? Kind of like a burn pile. Yeah, so we have on the south end of Cave City, and have had for decades in various forms, a big sign that's on, like 3 posts or was. And it says, "Welcome to Cave City, home of the world's sweetest watermelons." And it's really become an icon for the region, I mean, so yeah, when the tornado came through, it didn't actually literally hit that part of town, but the wind was such that it broke the big, huge post that it was on. And it was interesting, like, it didn't knock it down flat on the ground. Instead, what it did, and you've seen the picture, what it did is it broke it, but then it like pushed it back against one of our old downtown buildings. So it's like, it's still quasi standing, but like you said, it's all, the metal panels of the sign are all rippled and bit and all that. What's crazy though is the electrical connection for the light that lights it up at night is still intact. And we've looked, I mean, it's perfectly safe, don't get me wrong, but it's lit up every night. It's still lit up. So if you drive in from the south, you see this huge crumpled, mangled sign that's laying down. It still says, "Welcome to Cave City, home of the world's sweetest watermelons," and it's just shining as bright as ever. I'll be honest, I was a little bit worried about that at first. We were so focused on, the big things like, okay, our fire department has a massive hole in the back of it and is leaking water. Or, City Hall has all kinds of stuff all over it. Or, the grocery store, a lot of important things to deal with. The sign kind of got put on the back burner. And so we'll fix the sign after we know that the fire station is secure, that kind of thing, which makes sense to me. But as it went on, now we're like 4 months out, and one day I kind of realized, oh gosh, we still haven't fixed this sign, and I know there had to be some people in town thinking, what the heck? Why have we not fixed this sign? And I did start to have people ask me, not in a mean way at all, but they were like, "Hey, Mayor, like, I'm just curious, like, are we going to fix the sign? Are we not going to fix it?" So again, I pulled in some of my, close folks, and I was like, okay, so, we're working with some sign companies. We're trying to get quotes. It's going to be expensive to fix because it's big and all this. Should we just get rid of it for now? Like, just bulldoze it out of there. Just get it gone. That way it's not sitting there like an eyesore for the festival. And, but no, like 100%, everybody agreed. And this is what I thought also, but I want to know what other people think. I didn't put this out there. I thought that we should leave it. I didn't think that we should just take it down and get rid of it. Because to me, as you saw in my post, I felt like it meant something. When you drive in for the festival now, we got probably 10,000 people showing up this weekend for this watermelon festival from all over the country. When they see that sign, it's like, oh yeah, they got hit by a tornado, because honestly, if you drive through other pieces of town, it's not as easy to tell as it was, a month ago, 2 months ago, certainly 3 months ago. But man, that sign, that really reminds you of what we've been through, it was kind of like a defiant light. And I think that's what I first posted of it once. I don't know if you ever saw it, but in the immediate aftermath, when I saw it was still lit up, I stopped one night and I took a picture and I said something about, punched in the face or something, knocked down, yes, but still shining bright, absolutely. And so that sign has been that way for 4 months. And I thought, heck, I'm leaving it. And so once I put that post out, and you saw probably the reaction when I posted that, I thought, oh gosh, I wonder if I'm going to get some people that are like, yeah, we agree. And some people are like, I don't understand why it's taken 4 months. But everybody so far has been like, absolutely correct, Mayor. Like, yes, that sign has been like a rallying cry for the city. And I had a lot of people tell me, please leave that sign. Don't get rid of it. And that's why I think you saw at the end of it, I was like, I know some of you may be thinking, why is it still there? But I said, I'm just asking you to please trust the process with me for a little bit longer, because we are bringing it back. And when we do, it's going to be, again, kind of like burning the pile. It's going to be a great marker for us again of like, hey, look, now we're really back. We've got our sign back, and we're at another level of recovery.
The sign is also a demonstration of the city's priorities. And, you got a lot of more important things to do before you fix the sign.
Before I fix the sign. Absolutely. And, like I said, I'm sure there was some people that thought, I don't understand why I don't fix that sign. But when you have, 20 businesses that are affected, and you have 50 houses that are affected, half of those that were totally destroyed. And that people have been sitting for 2 months in the limbo that was the FEMA decision. Am I going to be able to rebuild my house? Am I not going to be able to? And we're trying to figure all this stuff out. At the end of the day, frankly, the sign's just not that big of a deal to me. It's not the priority.
I hope, though, when the time comes to replace it, that the crumpled sign gets an installation at City Hall or someplace as a commemoration of this. It doesn't just get thrown away.
Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to see that. It's actually, like I said, it's about 12 by 24, so it's pretty good size. But, our long-term dream, again, is to build a nice new community center. And honestly, I think that the lobby of a community center, and I'm a history grad student, so I'm big on history. I think it'd be great to have a place in the lobby of our new community center someday to tell the history of Cave City in its entirety, but to also tell a little bit of this story. And maybe, like you said, it'd be cool to have that sign there as kind of a memento, if you will.
Well, maybe this podcast can also be part of the oral history of Cave City and the great tornado of 2025. Mayor Jonas Anderson, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Thanks for being willing to be open to it and to be so candid and to share this horrific experience that you and your community went through. I can only imagine that people who will listen to this interview will come away with some really clear instruction and maybe some inspiration about how to approach the challenges in their own community. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just, as a last, thing, I would say if someone out there is going through this, take it a little bit at a time. It's going to take a long time to recover. It's not going to be quick by any means. It's not going to be a straight line. You're going to make some mistakes, but at the end of the day, if if your people are your priority and you just focus on that and do right by your people and do what you know is best for them, it'll be fine. Everybody will understand. It'll work out great.
Really well said. Thanks again to my guest, Mayor Jonas Anderson of Cave City, Arkansas. Mayor Anderson reminds us that leadership in a crisis isn't just about emergency response. It's about staying grounded, being visible, and helping people find strength in one another. His story speaks to the resilience of small-town America and the quiet courage it takes to lead through loss and into recovery. Hey, this show is all about real-world leadership, and we'd love to include your voice in that conversation. So here's a question for you. What else would you like to know from Mayor Anderson or from others who've gained the hard-earned experience of leading through disaster? Let me know your questions, and we'll dedicate a future episode to go even deeper into this topic. Call me at 602-688-2724 and leave me a message. Your question might just shape a future conversation. And whether you've led through crisis or have any other kind of experience to share, if you're leading in your community on a board, a council, or through public service, use the podcast guest link in the show notes to introduce yourself. We'd love to feature you in a future episode. Hey, if today's conversation was meaningful to you, please follow the show and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Your comments help more local leaders discover these conversations. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.